Let's talk a little bit about this whole concept of human dependency needs, narcissism, addiction, and how it all fits together. What you're seeing on your screen now is what I would call a typical addiction cycle. And when we teach the addictions, we teach both our patients and the people we work with, our therapists, what this cycle looks like. So let me just give you a quick overview, understanding that my goal here is not to teach you about this cycle, but more to teach you how it is that our clients end up acting out addictively and why. So if you look at an addiction cycle as being a cycle that ranges from control at one end to release at the other, you begin to get a sense of what the addict is looking for. Our strong emotions, bad days, good days, angry days, sad days, they're going to produce emotions. And if you have emotional challenges, if you are overwhelmed by strong emotions, if you don't know how to manage stressors, if you have trouble self-regulating, it's not unusual or surprising that instead of looking for a release from those emotions, like support, help, or a good cry, or a good hug, or someone to cheer for you, what you might do if you grow up with trauma, if you grew up with abuse, if you grew up not really learning to depend on people, is you're going to want to control those emotions. You're going to want to manage those emotions. You're going to want to handle those emotions. And so when people have a strong emotional experience, if they're addicts, and they're active in their addiction, they tend to go off into fantasy. And when that raise comes in, or they get fired, or they have a child, or whatever that stressor is, they seek to have control over what they're feeling, and they start to get into addictive rituals and addictive fantasies that leave them, as we've spoken about, spacing out and dissociating and in an addictive high that allows them to not have to deal with the uncomfortable stressor. And what ultimately leads them to emotional release is the using of the drugs, or the acting out sexually, or the gambling, or whatever it is that their addictive disorder is, whatever is their trigger that lets them have that emotional let go. So going from control to release for an active addict means entering addiction. And after that release, or the active part of the addiction, there's going to be some numbing and some feelings of shame and blame. And ultimately, if you keep going around an addictive cycle, your life is going to get less and less fulfilling. You're going to be less and less happy. But if your sole means of coping with unhappiness and emotional stress is to use addictive behavior, that's what makes it a cycle. Because the more you act out, the more you engage with your addiction, the worse you feel about yourself. The worse you feel about yourself, the more you need to turn to an addiction to feel better. So is someone's desire to drink or use or act out simply driven by their emotions? And what I would suggest to you is no, they're not. And here's a way to think about it. First of all, the slide says, strong emotions and stressors generate and stimulate our dependency needs, and shame is what prevents them from getting met. What I mean by that is the following, that our emotions don't exist in a vacuum. You know, when I put my hand on a hot stove, I have a very strong feeling. It's a physical feeling, not an emotional feeling, but it's a pretty strong feeling, and it's usually, ouch, that really hurts. Why? Do I experience pain when I put my hand on that hot stove? In other words, if our emotions aren't simply there to move us from one state to another, but they actually have more of a purpose, what might that purpose be? And what I'm encouraging you to think about is that the feeling of pain that I experience when I put my hand on a hot stove is information. And that, in essence, is what our emotions are. They are information. The information I get when I put my hand on a hot stove is, take your hand off of there and don't put it back because you're going to damage yourself. So the hurt and the pain is information that tells me to stop doing that and not do that again. But what about our psychological emotions? What are they there to tell us about? And what I would suggest to you is that our psychological emotions, or the emotions that do not come out through a physical experience, are really there also with a purpose. The purpose of our emotions is to drive us toward connection. So let me explain that to you very simply. A few years ago, I had one of my dogs died. And I loved this particular animal, and he was really a sweetie, and he was a really cute dog. And so I took pictures and I put them on Facebook, and I told my friends, and my spouse and I, we all dealt with the loss. And I have to tell you that I was very, very sad about the loss of this dog. And what happened for me is I started getting phone calls and texts and emails and Facebook posts. People were writing me saying, really sorry your dog died. That's really sad. I really love your dog. Saw you together. I saw how much you enjoyed each other. You know, that's kind of a sad thing. So when I express the sad emotion and I get back the nurturing and understanding, does that mean I no longer am sad? I'm no longer grieving my dog? No. I'm still in grief. But is there a difference between reaching out and telling other people what you're feeling and have them validate it and support it, and simply sitting in your feelings by yourself? Absolutely. And I believe that we are meant to use our feelings as information to reach out and depend on other people. That our emotions are simply a tug on our shoulder to remind us that we have human dependency needs that cannot be met alone. They can only be met in relationship with other people. So when I'm sad, and if I express that sadness, people make me feel better by comforting me. If let's say I'm the guy who just had a baby and I'm running around a hospital with some little picture of a lobster kind of object on my phone, because that's what they look like, and I'm running around saying, look, I had a baby, and showing everybody in the hospital, kind of look like an idiot, I mean, why don't I just sit in that hard plastic chair and say, gee, aren't I lucky I had a baby, good for me. I think it's because when that father runs around and shows that picture, he has a need of other people. He wants that joy to be celebrated with others. He doesn't sit in that plastic chair and say, oh, I love you, little lobster. He runs around and shows everybody that little lobster because he wants them to respond to him. The emotion of joy brings up his need for people to say, good for you, I'm so proud of you, wow, great, isn't that? In other words, the feeling brings up the need for validation. He's not less joyful after hearing all those people sing for him. He's more joyful and grounded in that joy because he is connected to others. And I'll give you one last example. If you're that angry person at work who just hates the boss and you're not in a particularly high position, it's not a great idea to sit around with your coworkers and talk about how much you hate the boss. But I know a lot of people who would do it anyway, despite the fact that it might cause them a lot of problems. So why does somebody sit around the copy machine at work and talk about how much they hate their boss to someone who they know might share it with the boss? And the answer is simple. They have a need. They're expressing that anger because they want someone to say what? They want that person to say, you're right, that boss is a witch, and I don't like her either, and they feel validated, they feel mirrored, they feel appropriately and healthfully responded to because they expressed their emotion to another person, and what they got back from that person was some form of a reflective, supportive response. I think this is what human beings do. This is what our feelings are for. It's great, and I admire you if you are an independent John Wayne type and you can just sit with your emotions and work through them. Good for you. But I'd admire you more if you shared them in community, shared them in relationship, and allowed other people to be there for you as a response. And then you'll feel even better than if you handled those emotions on your own, which is something I'm not even sure I understand what that means, because in order to fully work through our emotions, we're best suited by being in connection and relationship.